A soaked 7-year-old girl burst through the emergency room doors, her tiny arms clutching her feverish baby sister. But as the adults around her stared, not a single one moved to help. That is, until a wealthy CEO, lost in his own world, looked up from his phone, heard a single desperate plea, and made a choice that would shatter his life and remake it into something he never imagined. Before we get into tonight's story, we have a little tradition here. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see our community connect from all corners of the country. The storm had been raging since dusk, the kind of Midwestern thunderstorm that turns gutters into rivers and makes everyone in the emergency room a little more patient with each other because nobody wants to be out in it. Wet jackets hung over the backs of plastic chairs. A vending machine hummed in the corner, its light flickering every few seconds like it couldn't decide whether to work. A muted television bolted near the ceiling flashed a weather alert in silent red bars. Nurses moved fast under hard fluorescent light, the kind that makes even healthy people look tired. Ethan Cole sat near the window in a charcoal suit that didn't belong in a place like this. Phone in one hand, tie loosened just enough to breathe. He'd come because Marcus Webb, a business partner he was courting for a hospital systems deal, had a father wheeled in 2 hours earlier after a cardiac scare. Ethan had shaken hands, said the right things, and now he was simply waiting for a decent moment to leave. He checked his phone again. 7 new messages from his chief operating officer, all about tomorrow's board call. He didn't look up when the sliding doors hissed open. He looked up when they didn't hiss shut. A small girl stood in the gap, soaked through, barefoot on the slick linoleum. Her sneakers gone or lost somewhere between wherever she'd come from and here. She couldn't have been more than 7. In her arms, wrapped in a hoodie 2 sizes too big for her, was a baby. Limp, flushed, breathing in short, uneven pulls that even a stranger could tell were wrong. She looked barely a year old, too small to understand the storm and too sick to fight it. The front desk clerk stood halfway up. "Sweetheart, you can't just... Do you have a parent with you? I need a guardian's signature before..." The girl didn't answer. She kept walking, past the desk, past a man on crutches, her bare feet slapping the floor in a rhythm that said she had been told exactly one thing to do tonight, and she intended to do it. A security guard took a step toward her, hand half raised, more out of procedure than menace. The girl flinched, a small full-body flinch, shoulders up, chin down, but she didn't stop moving. She didn't cry out either. She just kept walking, holding the baby tighter. Ethan set his phone down without meaning to. "Ma'am, I need you to hold on," the clerk tried again, but a charge nurse named Denise Holloway was already crossing the floor, drawn by instinct more than any bell. 22 years on this unit had taught her what real emergencies looked like, and paperwork was not going to slow her down for this one. "Let me see her," Denise said, already reaching. "Let me see the baby." The girl hesitated. 1 beat, no more. Then she let the baby go into Denise's arms like she was handing over something she had been carrying much farther than the length of a hallway. Her arms, empty now, hung strange at her sides as if they didn't know what to do without the weight. "She's burning up," Denise said, already moving toward triage, her voice sharpening into command. "Get me a PETA's cart. Now!" The doors swung. The moment cracked open into motion. Gurney wheels, a monitor's rising beep, a doctor's voice calling out vitals. And in the middle of it, the barefoot girl stood alone on the wet floor, drenched and shaking, looking suddenly much smaller without a baby to hold. Ethan was on his feet before he decided to stand. He didn't know why. He told himself later it was simple decency. A kid alone in a hospital at midnight, soaked to the bone. But some older part of him, the part that still flinched at hospital hallways, had already recognized something in the way she stood. Not lost, but purposeful, like she still had a job to finish. He crouched down near her, keeping his distance, keeping his voice low the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. Hey, you're okay. She's with the doctors now." The girl looked at him. Really looked, cataloging him the way a kid does when she's had to learn quickly which adults are safe. Water dripped from her hair onto her collarbone. Her lips had a faint blue tinge. "You're freezing," Ethan said. "Let's get you a blanket, okay? Nobody's going anywhere." She didn't move toward him, but she didn't run either. Her hand crept into the pocket of the oversized hoodie, and for a second, Ethan thought she was reaching for a phone, some emergency contact card. anything a responsible adult would have given her. What she pulled out instead was an old bent Metro card, its corners soft from being carried too long. She didn't hand it over, she just held it, like proof of something, and looked straight at him with an intensity that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. "Don't let him sign anything," she said, her breath still ragged from running. "Mama said I had to find Ethan Cole." The name landed in his chest like something dropped from a height. Outside, thunder rolled low over the city. Inside, the vending machine kept humming, indifferent, while a hospital security guard radioed for a supervisor, and Denise's voice barked orders from behind a curtain that had just swung shut on a baby whose fever hadn't broken yet. Ethan hadn't run into that hospital tonight looking for anyone. She had run in looking for him. They gave Sadie a blanket and a plastic chair near the pediatric bay, close enough to see the curtain Emma had disappeared behind. She took the blanket. She left the juice box untouched on the table beside her, unopened, like she didn't trust things that were handed to her without a reason. A hospital social worker named Mara Leland crouched down to Sadie's eye level, notepad low, voice easy. "I'm going to help figure some things out tonight, okay? Can I look through the bag for a second?" Sadie nodded once, watching Mara's hands the whole time. The diaper bag told its own story before anyone said a word. A can of formula, nearly empty, the plastic scoop missing. One spare diaper. A bottle of baby Tylenol with the child-proof cap gone, replaced by a twist of foil. A gas station receipt from 3 days ago. A motel keycard worn soft at the corners from a property off the highway near the river. The kind of place that rents by the week and doesn't ask questions. "Where did you two come from tonight, sweetheart?" Mara asked. "The bus," Sadie said, "then walking." Nobody in that hallway said anything for a moment. Ethan, standing a few feet back with someone else's coffee going cold in his hand, understood the weight of those 4 words better than anyone wanted to. A 7-year-old barefoot carrying a feverish infant through a thunderstorm, on a bus and then on foot, because that was the only route she knew to get help. "You did good," Mara told her. "You got her here. That's the important part." Sadie's chin lifted slightly at that, some small piece of her straightening under the words, though her eyes didn't leave the curtain. Denise Holloway came by twice over the next hour, checking on Sadie the way she checked on patients. Quick, practical, no wasted motion, but her hand rested a beat longer than necessary on Sadie's shoulder each time. "Emma's fever's coming down," she said the second time. "She's a fighter, like her sister." Sadie almost smiled. Almost. It was Mara who pieced the rest together. In low conversation with the intake coordinator in a call to county records, Claire Brooks, 31, had passed away 6 weeks earlier. Complications from an illness she'd been too broke and too proud to treat properly until it was past treating. Since then, the girls had been shuffled between a co-worker's spare room, a cousin twice removed, and for the last several nights, nowhere steady at all. And now there was Derek Voss. Derek was Emma's biological father. Never married to Claire, in and out of the picture for 2 years. Gone entirely for the last one. He was not Sadie's father. He had never claimed to be. But Claire's death had changed the math for him. Emma qualified for survivor benefits now. Monthly, federal, and dependable, tied to a dead mother's work record. And Derek, Mara learned with a few careful phone calls, had a sentencing review coming up in an unrelated fraud case. The kind of hearing where a judge likes to see evidence of responsibility, a baby daughter suddenly and conveniently claimed, made a compelling exhibit. Sadie did not fit that picture. She was old enough to talk, old enough to remember things, old enough to be a problem. None of this was said aloud in front of Sadie. She didn't need it spelled out. Children who have survived enough learn to read a room by its silences, and Sadie had clearly survived plenty. She kept her knees drawn up in the chair, socked feet tucked beneath her. Someone had found her a pair of socks from a donation bin, and she watched every set of doors like she was calculating exits. "Sadie," Ethan said gently, sitting on the low table across from her. "Is there someone we should call? Family? Maybe." She looked at him for a long moment, the same cataloging look from the ER floor. "Mama said if anything happened, I wasn't supposed to call anybody. I was supposed to find you." "Why me?" Sadie shrugged, small and tired, a child's shrug that meant she either didn't know or wasn't going to say. She pulled the blanket tighter instead, and Ethan let the question go, filing it away next to the MetroCard still folded in her fist. Mara stepped away toward the nurse's station to take a call, her voice dropping low enough that Ethan had to lean in to catch the shift in her tone. He watched her shoulders change, the posture of someone hearing news they didn't want. She came back holding her phone against her chest like it might ring again any second. "He's called twice already," Mara said quietly, glancing toward Sadie before choosing her next words with care. "Says he's Emma's father, says he's on his way." Outside, the storm had softened to a steady patter against the windows, but something in the hallway had gone tighter, more alert. Ethan looked at Sadie, curled small in her chair, socked feet, and borrowed blanket, and a dead woman's instructions folded into her palm. The danger, he understood now, had never been behind them. It was on its way to the hospital. "May your family be blessed with health, peace, and prosperity." Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He found the charge nurse's station and asked plainly what the process was for a man claiming paternity to walk in and take a child home in the middle of the night. Denise Holloway gave him the honest answer. Not much stood in Derek's way yet. Not on paper, not tonight. But process could be slowed. Process could be made to take its time. "I'm not asking anyone to break protocol," Ethan said. "I'm asking someone to follow it, carefully, every step, in writing." Denise studied him a beat longer than necessary, the way she studied anyone claiming to be helpful at 2 in the morning. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once and picked up the phone. Mara Leland was the one who explained it to Ethan in plain terms a few minutes later, out of Sadie's earshot. Emergency review meant pediatric staff and social work had to sign off before any release, medical or custodial. It wasn't a wall, it was a delay, and a documented one. Ethan asked her to request that hospital security preserve the entrance camera footage from tonight. Sadie running in barefoot. The timestamp. All of it. "Why?" Mara asked. "Because someday somebody's going to ask what actually happened here," Ethan said. "I'd rather have the answer already sitting in a file than have to go find it." He gave a full statement to hospital security himself, calmly, in detail, and left his direct cell number instead of an assistant's. Then he sat back down near Sadie's chair and stayed there. His phone kept lighting up. 6 texts became 11. His chief operating officer wanted to know if he was still coming to the strategy session first thing, the one that mattered to the board, the one 3 people had built their week around. Ethan looked at the screen, then at Sadie's socked feet tucked under the blanket, and put the phone face down on the table without answering. 2 hours passed that way. Denise checked on Emma twice more, her expression easing slightly each time. Mara sat with Sadie for a while, not pushing conversation, just being present, the way a good adult learns to be present with a child who has decided trust is expensive. It was Denise who said it out loud, refilling Ethan's coffee without being asked, setting it down in front of him like a small, ordinary kindness. "Most folks who come through here with money don't stick around past the handshake." "I'm not most folks," Ethan said. "We'll see," Denise said not unkindly and walked away. It wasn't approval, it was reserved judgment, the kind you had to earn twice. Near 4 o'clock in the morning, Sadie was still awake, knees drawn to her chest, watching the doors the way she'd watched them since she arrived. Ethan sat down across from her on the low table again, elbows on his knees, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "You should try to sleep," he said. "Emma's fever's down. Nobody's taking either of you anywhere tonight. I mean that." Sadie looked at him for a long moment, not like a child looking at a rescuer, but like someone doing math, weighing whether a promise from a stranger in an expensive suit was worth anything at all. "You keep saying that," she said. "Tonight. Like tomorrow's different." "Tomorrow I'll tell you the truth about that too," he said. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like yet, but I know what tonight looks like." She considered that. It seemed to satisfy her more than a bigger promise would have. She pulled the blanket up over her knees and settled back into the chair, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on some middle distance past his shoulder. "Mama didn't send me to you because you were nice," she said finally, quiet, almost to herself. Ethan went still. "What do you mean?" Sadie's fingers found the edge of the blanket and worried it. A small, worn gesture, the kind a kid does when the words underneath are heavier than the ones coming out. "She said you'd understand why she picked you. She said you owe her a truth." The heating system clicked on somewhere overhead, a low mechanical hum filling the silence that followed. Ethan opened his mouth once, found nothing sturdy enough to say, and closed it again. "Owe her what?" he finally managed. Sadie didn't answer right away. She was fading now, exhaustion finally winning the argument her body had been having with itself for hours. Her eyes drifted shut, open halfway, drifted shut again. "She said you'd know," she murmured, her voice thinning toward sleep. "She said you'd understand." Ethan sat very still in the plastic chair, watching a 7-year-old finally surrender to sleep in a hospital hallway, a bent MetroCard still curled inside her closed fist. He did not know what truth Claire Brooks believed he owed her, but somewhere behind his ribs, something old and long buried had already started to stir, and he was afraid, genuinely, quietly afraid, that he might know exactly where to find it. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in a borrowed office near the hospital administration wing, laptop open, coffee gone cold, and let himself go back to a place he'd spent years keeping the door shut on. The Workforce Training Partnership had been his idea, back when Cole Health Systems was still small enough that he answered his own emails. A pilot program for billing clerks and patient access staff in North St. Louis. 6 months of training, guaranteed interviews, a real shot at stable work for people the economy kept passing over. He remembered the classroom more than he expected to. Folding chairs, coffee that tasted like a vending machine, a woman near the back who asked sharper questions than anyone else in the room. Claire Brooks. She'd been 24 then, sharp and funny, in a way that made people underestimate how much she was caring. She used to make the other trainees laugh during breaks, then go quiet the second the instructor started talking again, taking notes like her life depended on getting it right. It did, in a way. She told him once, briefly in the hallway, that she was doing this for her daughter. She hadn't said Sadie's name. She hadn't needed to. Ethan closed his eyes. He remembered liking her, respecting her. She'd graduated the program near the top of her cohort, landed a patient access job at a clinic on the north side, and sent him one short thank you note that he still had somewhere, had never deleted. And then, somewhere in the following years, he'd forgotten her entirely. Not because she stopped mattering, but because his own life had come apart, in a way that swallowed everything else. His daughter had lived 4 days. He didn't let himself think about it often. Grief like that didn't get smaller with time. It just learned to sit quietly in a back room until something opened the door. Around the anniversary of her death every year, Ethan went somewhere inside himself that no board meeting or headline could reach. He stopped answering personal messages. He let his assistant filter everything ruthlessly because he could not survive one more unscheduled reminder of how much the world kept moving without her in it. 4 years later, during that same brutal anniversary week, the week when Ethan still let grief shut every door inside him, Claire Brooks had emailed him twice. He hadn't known that until tonight, until his now retired assistant, tracked down by a 2 a.m. phone call that Ethan was not proud of making, confirmed it gently, carefully, the way you confirm something you suspect will hurt. Yes, there'd been 2 messages from a Claire Brooks marked private, asking to meet about a safety concern. One subject line mentioned Derek Voss by name. The other was shorter, almost painfully careful. "Please, I need advice before he finds us." Yes, he'd been told to route her through general customer support. Yes, that had been Ethan's instruction, given without really hearing it, during the worst month of his life. He had not chosen cruelty. He had chosen distance, because distance was the only thing that let him keep breathing that year. But sitting in a hospital office at 5 o'clock in the morning, he understood there was no comfortable place to file that decision. A woman who trusted him enough to ask for help privately had been quietly redirected into a form letter, and whatever she needed to say, she'd carried alone from that point forward. That was the truth he owed her. Not a mistake, a choice. Mara knocked once and stepped in without waiting for an answer, holding a thin folder warm from the printer. "A legal aid supervisor returned my emergency message," she said. "They had this scan from Claire's file. She dropped the original off about 2 months ago, dated and signed." Ethan opened it. It wasn't a custody order. It wasn't anything that could override Derek's biological claim to Emma. It was smaller and more human than that. A written record of prior concerns, names of 2 neighbors who might testify to what they'd heard through motel walls, and a single line near the bottom that Ethan read twice before it fully landed. "If anything happens to me, Ethan Cole is the only person outside my family with the standing and the resources to keep my girls together. He knew me before I was invisible." Ethan set the folder down carefully, like it might come apart in his hands. "She didn't think I was some hero," he said quietly. "She just remembered I used to answer." Mara didn't get a chance to respond. Her phone buzzed against the desk, and her expression shifted the moment she read the screen. She was already moving toward the door before she spoke, her voice having lost its careful calm. "Ethan, get down here, now." He's at the front desk. He's got Emma's birth certificate, a signed paternity acknowledgement, and an emergency guardianship petition his attorney prepared last night. He says they'll file it the minute the clerk's office opens. Ethan was on his feet, folder still in hand. "Derek, the court hasn't ruled on anything yet," Mara said, already halfway into the hallway, her footsteps quickening against the tile. "But on paper, right now, he's the father." Ethan followed her out, past the vending machine, past the chairs where Sadie had spent the whole night watching the doors. The weight of a debt he hadn't known he owed settled into his chest alongside something else, something sharper, more immediate. He had been too late once already. He was not going to let a form letter be the last thing he ever gave Claire Brooks's daughters. Derek Voss did not look like trouble. That was the first thing Ethan noticed, and the thing that unsettled him most. Derek stood at the front desk in a clean button-down, hair combed, a manila folder held against his chest like a man reporting for a job interview. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't demanding. He spoke to the intake clerk in a low, patient voice, the voice of someone who had rehearsed, sounding reasonable. "I understand this is a lot to process," Derek was saying as Ethan and Mara approached. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here for my daughter." He turned when he heard them, and his eyes moved over Ethan with a practiced, unbothered calm. No hostility, just a quiet recalculation, like a man checking the odds. "You must be Mr. Cole," he said. "I've heard a lot about you tonight. A CEO personally involved in a custody matter. That's quite something." "I'm involved because a 7-year-old ran here in the rain to ask for help," Ethan said evenly. "That's the whole reason." "She's confused," Derek said, not unkindly, shaking his head with something that almost passed for sympathy. "She's been through a lot, losing her mother. I understand why she'd latch on to anyone who showed up, but Emma's my daughter, biologically, legally. That's not confusion, that's just a fact." He wasn't wrong, and that was what made the moment so hard to stand in. Mara's face stayed neutral, professional, but Ethan could see the tension behind it. Derek held up the folder. "My attorney prepared an emergency guardianship petition last night. The clerk's office opens soon, and I intend to file it. I have proof I'm Emma's father. I have rights." A hospital attorney, called in at Mara's insistence, reviewed the documents at a side table while Derek waited, arms crossed, patient as a man who already believed he'd won. The attorney's read was plain and unwelcome. Derek's biological claim to Emma was real, and courts leaned toward biological parents by default, especially fathers only recently made aware of a mother's death. Sadie, meanwhile, was no blood relation to Derek at all, which meant, in the coldest legal sense, she wasn't his problem to solve. "He doesn't want her," Ethan said quietly to Mara, watching Derek check his phone with the ease of a man confident the hard part was already behind him. "He wants what she comes with." Mara didn't disagree, but agreement wasn't evidence, and evidence was the only currency that mattered here. What Claire's folder gave them wasn't a custody order, it was smaller, and it took an hour of urgent calls to turn into anything usable at all. A basis, the attorney explained, for Ethan to file as a proposed fictive kin placement and to ask the court for an emergency hold, keeping both girls together until Child Protective Services could look harder at Derek's history. Not a victory, a request. The kind of request a judge could grant or deny on a Tuesday morning without much ceremony. They got the hearing by mid-morning, hastily arranged in a juvenile courtroom that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. Denise came, still in scrubs, to speak to Emma's condition on arrival. The fever, the visible strain, the bruising along Sadie's forearm that the ER physician had documented and photographed. A pediatrician testified about Emma's fear response, how she startled and cried at male voices raised even slightly. Mara laid out the motel keycard, the near-empty formula can, the pattern of a family running from something, not simply falling on hard times. Derek's attorney called it grief-driven overreaction. He called Ethan's involvement a wealthy stranger inserting himself into a private family matter for reasons that have not been explained. He wasn't entirely wrong about that either, and it stung more than Ethan expected. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s who had clearly heard every kind of hard case a courtroom could produce, did not rule the way either side wanted. She granted the hold. Both girls to remain together, placed provisionally with Ethan Cole pending an expedited investigation. No permanent decision made about either child. Derek was not shut out of the process. He would have supervised contact with Emma while CPS reviewed the concerns raised, but he would not, that day, be walking out with anyone. Derek's calm cracked for the first time, just slightly, his jaw tightening as he turned toward Ethan in the hallway outside the courtroom. "You're really going to let a CEO buy his way into my family," he said, his voice low enough not to carry, but sharp enough to land. "Nobody bought anything," Ethan said. "A judge just looked at the facts." Derek held his stare a moment longer, then walked away without another word. Footsteps unhurried, a man recalculating his next move, not a man defeated. Ethan watched him go and understood, with some unease, that this was only the opening round. He didn't leave that courthouse with the girls in any final sense. He left with something smaller and far harder to carry: standing, and a fight that had only just begun. Ethan solved problems the way he knew how: fast, thorough, and with a checklist. But this time, the checklist did not belong only to him. Before Sadie and Emma crossed his threshold, a CPS caseworker walked through every room of his Central West End townhouse with a clipboard, opened cabinets, checked smoke detectors, tested window locks, and asked Ethan questions no board member had ever dared to ask him. Within 48 hours of the provisional placement order, his house had transformed. A crib appeared in the guest room, assembled by a contractor who owed him a favor and finished before sunrise. The pantry filled with baby formula, applesauce pouches, and cereal in 3 flavors because he hadn't known which one a 7-year-old would like. Cabinet locks clicked into place on every low cupboard. A pediatric appointment calendar, color-coded and laminated, went up on the refrigerator door. It looked on paper like a house ready for children. It did not feel like one. Sadie treated the townhouse the way she treated the hospital hallway, like a place she might be asked to leave without warning. She didn't unpack the small bag of donated clothes Mara had given her. She kept crackers wrapped in a napkin in the pocket of her hoodie, the same hoodie washed now but still hers. At night, she pulled a blanket down to the floor near Emma's crib and slept there instead of the bed down the hall, close enough to hear if anything changed. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," Ethan told her the second night, crouching in the doorway, careful not to come too far in. "I know," Sadie said, not looking up. "I want to." He let it go. Denise had told him once in the hallway back at the hospital that trust in kids like Sadie didn't arrive on anyone's schedule but their own. Rushing it only taught them to perform trust instead of feel it. And Sadie had clearly learned enough performing already. Emma was harder to read in a different way. She startled at the sound of Ethan's footsteps on the hardwood, cried harder when his voice dropped low, the specific alarm of a baby who had learned, somewhere, that certain sounds preceded certain outcomes. Ethan started walking softer through his own house. He started talking to her from across the room before he ever got close. The way you'd approach something wild and frightened, giving it time to recognize you weren't a threat. He learned to warm her bottle exactly 1 degree cooler than the instructions suggested, because Sadie mentioned once, offhand, that Emma didn't like it too warm. And getting that small detail right felt like the first thing he'd earned rather than bought. Sadie noticed. "She'll stop doing that," she said one evening, watching him hang back at the kitchen doorway instead of crossing straight to the crib. "Eventually." "How do you know?" "Because I stopped too," Sadie said, and went back to lining up crackers on a paper towel. The company noticed differently. By the end of the week, a local news outlet had picked up the story from the ugliest angle available: a wealthy CEO, private attorneys, closed-door custody hearings, a grieving working father shut out by money and influence. It wasn't the whole truth, but it fit a shape people already believed in, and shapes traveled faster than facts. Ethan's board called an emergency session. His chief operating officer, a decent man under normal circumstances, laid it out plainly across the conference table. The merger the company had spent 18 months building was now tangled in headlines about class, power, and executive overreach at exactly the moment investors wanted quiet certainty. "Step back publicly," his COO said. "Let the system run its course. Nobody's asking you to abandon the girls. Just stop being the face of it." "I am the face of it," Ethan said. "There's no version where I disappear from this, and it still means anything." He thought of Claire's line in that folder. He knew me before I was invisible and understood, sitting in that conference room, exactly what kind of man made himself invisible when it was convenient. Nobody at that table had a good answer for him, and he didn't have a clean one for them either. He left the meeting without resolving anything, which felt, for a man who built his career on resolving things, like its own kind of failure. He came home to find the kitchen light on at 2 o'clock in the morning. Sadie was at the table, a paper napkin spread flat in front of her, tracing lines onto it with a pencil she'd found in a junk drawer. Ethan stood in the doorway a moment before she noticed him, and what he saw stopped him cold. Not a child doodling, but a child working, careful and precise, marking a route. "What are you drawing?" he asked quietly. Sadie's pencil paused. She didn't cover it up, but she didn't look up either. "The bus route," she said. "Back to the hospital, in case I need it again." Ethan crossed the kitchen slowly and sat down across from her. The cabinet locks and the color-coded calendar and the fully stocked pantry suddenly feeling like nothing at all against one plain fact. He had given her a house full of new things, and she had spent the night making sure she still knew the way out. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to support the channel. The door at the end of the hallway had stayed shut for 4 years. Sadie found it by accident, the way children find things adults spend years trying to keep hidden. She was looking for the bathroom, half asleep, and turned the wrong handle. Ethan heard the click from downstairs and knew, before he even reached the stairs, exactly which door it was. He found her standing in the frame, not moving, looking at a room that still held a crib with a mobile of paper stars, a rocking chair angled toward the window, a stack of unopened boxes along one wall. Everything sealed in the particular stillness of a room nobody had touched in years. "Whose room is this?" Sadie asked, quiet, not accusing, just asking. Ethan stood behind her a moment, hand braced on the doorframe, feeling the old familiar tightness rise in his chest. The instinct to close the door, redirect, change the subject, the way he changed the subject on himself for 4 years. He didn't do it. "My daughter's," he said. "Her name was Grace. She lived 4 days. Sadie turned to look at him then, and something in her face shifted. Not pity exactly, recognition. The look of someone realizing a stranger's grief had a shape she understood. "What happened?" she asked. "Her heart wasn't strong enough," Ethan said. "The doctors did everything they could. It wasn't enough." He kept his voice even because that was the only way he knew how to say it without it costing him more than he could afford to pay standing in a hallway. "I never took the room apart. I kept telling myself I'd get to it eventually. Every year I told myself that, and every year the door just stayed shut." Sadie stepped into the room, small and careful, and touched the edge of the crib rail with one finger, the way you'd touch something you weren't sure was allowed. "Mama's room. After she died, we had to leave in 1 day. The landlord needed it back." She said it plainly, without drama, the flat honesty of a child who had already learned that grief didn't come with the luxury of time. "You got to keep yours." It wasn't an accusation, it was just true, and it landed harder than any accusation could have. That night, after Sadie was asleep, Ethan went back into the room alone and started moving boxes. He didn't call anyone to do it for him. He carried them down himself, one at a time. The mobile last, wrapping it carefully in a towel before he set it in the hall closet instead of throwing it away. He left the door open when he finished. It stayed open after that, not as a memorial and not as if the grief had resolved itself in a single night, but because a closed door had never actually kept the pain out. It had only kept everyone else out with it. The investigation into Derek moved forward in the days that followed, slower and less dramatic than anyone would have liked, built from small, unglamorous pieces. Mara tracked down a former downstairs neighbor from Claire's old apartment who remembered raised voices through the walls. A motel manager near the river confirmed Claire had paid cash for a week, alone with both girls. An old urgent care record surfaced, showing Emma had been brought in once for a fall. That didn't line up with what Sadie remembered. When Mara placed it beside Claire's emails, the motel receipt, the neighbor's testimony, and Derek's sudden interest after the survivor benefits began, the separate pieces started to look less like coincidence and more like a map of what Claire had been running from. Derek's attorney reached out through back channels with an offer dressed up as compromise. Ethan could stop contesting Derek's claim to Emma so aggressively, let Sadie go into a separate state placement to cool the optics, and the whole story would quietly disappear from the headlines. Ethan didn't need more than a few seconds to answer. No. You'd keep the merger clean, his attorney said carefully. You'd keep Emma's case simple. I'm not protecting one of them by giving up the other, Ethan said. That's not protection. That's just a different kind of abandonment. The choice cost him what little leverage he still had left with the board, and probably the merger with it, though nobody said so directly. The proof came 3 nights later, ordinary and unannounced. A smoke alarm chirped once during a routine test, sharp in the quiet house, and Sadie was moving before the second chirp, down the hall into Emma's room, scooping the baby up on instinct the way she always had. But this time, at the top of the stairs, she stopped. She turned, found Ethan behind her, and held Emma out. Carry her, she said. Faster with 2 of us. Ethan took the baby into his arms, Emma's small weight settling against his chest, and followed Sadie down the stairs into the ordinary, unshaken house below. Sadie still reached for Emma first. That part hadn't changed. What had changed was that, for the first time, she let go. 11 weeks after Sadie ran barefoot into the ER, the custody ruling came down on a Thursday, delivered in the flat, procedural language courts use for things that matter more than any language could hold. Derek did not lose because Ethan had money. He lost because the investigation had finally assembled what Claire spent her last months trying to survive. A documented pattern of intimidation, a motel manager's account of a mother hiding, medical inconsistencies, and a financial motive tied plainly to Emma's survivor benefits. The judge granted Ethan permanent custody of both girls. He'd stayed inside the process, submitted to a home evaluation, answered every uncomfortable question CPS asked. He had sat through parenting classes beside people who did not know his name, handed over financial records, and learned that loving children did not exempt him from proving he could safely raise them. He had chosen, every time, both sisters together. Derek was permitted supervised visitation with Emma going forward, a narrow arrangement that would be reviewed again in a year. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the floor finally holding steady under something that had been shaking for months. The scars didn't disappear with the ruling. The merger stalled, then quietly died, and Ethan let it go. Therapy appointments filled 2 afternoons a week now. Emma still woke up screaming some nights, and Ethan learned to sit in the dark hallway outside her door until her breathing settled, not fixing anything, just staying. Sadie still kept a granola bar in her backpack. Old instincts didn't leave because the danger had. They left, if they left at all, one ordinary morning at a time. This particular morning was raining, soft and steady against the kitchen window. The house had the lived-in look Ethan never used to allow. Tiny socks draped over the back of a chair, a half-finished coloring page on the floor, a grocery list clipped to the fridge with a magnet from Schnucks. Ethan stood at the stove attempting pancakes. Smoke curled faintly off the pan. Emma pounded a spoon against her high chair tray with the single-minded fury of a 1-year-old who believed volume solved most problems. "You're doing it wrong," Sadie said from the table, not looking up from her crayon. "Mama put more cinnamon in." "How much more?" "A lot more." She glanced up, almost smiling, the specific, almost smile Ethan had learned to treasure. "You're supposed to smell it before you see it." He added more, mostly guessing, and the kitchen filled with a warmer, better smell. On the refrigerator, held up by the same Schnucks magnet, was the old MetroCard, bent and faded. Sadie had put it there herself weeks earlier, without explaining why. He hadn't asked. It wasn't a map out anymore. It was proof that one desperate instruction, given by a dying woman with almost nothing left, had actually led somewhere safe. Ethan still thought of Claire sometimes, standing at that stove, not as a debt he'd finally repaid, but as someone who deserved to know her girls had landed somewhere warm. The pancakes burned on one side. Nobody minded much. Sadie set down her crayon, stood, and wandered toward the hallway, calling back over her shoulder in a voice so ordinary, so unafraid, that it took Ethan a second to understand what he was actually hearing. "Ethan, Emma needs help with her spoon." He turned off the burner and went. That was the real miracle of it, in the end. Not the ruling, not the money, not even the room he'd finally opened. It was a 7-year-old calling his name from another room, expecting, without a second thought, that he'd answer. He always did. "I'm so curious. Where is everyone tuning in from today? Go ahead and drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to see where you're all at. So, what did you all think of that story? Did any part of it resonate with you or make you think? Let me know your honest thoughts. Wherever you are in the world, I truly hope you and your loved ones are safe and sound. My biggest wish for all of you is to have peace and well-being in your lives. And finally, I believe that everyone has a story worth telling. If you have a story, whether it's funny, heartwarming, or just plain unbelievable, that you think this community would love to hear, please don't hesitate to share it with us. We're all here to listen.